Armand had never thought one small decision could change the direction of his whole life. He was an ordinary young man, born and raised in a small village caught between two powerful groups that had been in conflict for years. For as long as he could remember, people around him had lived with fear. Fear of losing homes, fear of losing loved ones, and fear of the unknown. To Armand, this fear had become normal, like the wind that never stopped blowing. One evening, the air carried the sound of chaos once again. Armand was out near the edge of the village when loud noises echoed in the distance. People shouted and hurried to find safety, but Armand froze when he noticed something unusual. Just beyond the broken wall of a deserted house, a small child was trapped. She was sitting on the ground, her tiny body trembling, as dust and broken pieces of stone fell around her. Her wide eyes showed fear, but also trust in anyone who might come forward. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. For a moment, Armand hesitated. He knew very well who she was. Rumors in the village had described the child of the enemy commander, Lyra, a woman respected and feared on both sides. Some whispered that she was cold and merciless, and here was her daughter lost and helpless within reach of harm. Every instinct told Armand to stay away. Helping her could mean trouble. If anyone saw him, they might call him a traitor. If people found out, they might punish him for even touching her. But then he looked at the child again. She was small, fragile, and completely innocent of the battles fought by adults. In that instant, Armand stopped thinking about sides. He only thought about saving her. With quick steps, he ran toward her. Dust stung his eyes and his chest pounded, but he reached her just as a large piece of stone tilted dangerously above. Without a second thought, he threw himself over her, wrapping his arms around her small frame and using his body as a shield. The stone crashed down near them, sending more dust into the air, but the little girl was safe. Armand's heart raced. He expected her to scream or push him away, but instead she clung to him tightly, as if she already knew he meant no harm. Her soft voice whispered, "Don't leave me." Those words cut deep into Armand's chest. He had protected many people in his village before, but this felt different. She was not just another child. She was the child of someone everyone called an enemy. Yet in that moment, she was only a child who needed someone. Carefully, he lifted her in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her face streaked with dust and her small hands gripping his shirt. He tried to comfort her, telling her gently that she was safe, that nothing would hurt her while he was there. Slowly, she relaxed against him, trusting him fully. Armand's thoughts ran wild as he carried her away from the danger. What if someone saw him now? What would they think? He pushed those thoughts aside. Right now, keeping her safe was the only thing that mattered. As he walked further from the broken house, he found a quieter corner where the air was clearer. He set her down, carefully, brushing dust from her hair. The little girl looked up at him with eyes that reminded him of the clear sky after a storm. "Why did you help me?" she asked softly, her voice filled with confusion and wonder. Armand paused. How could he explain to a child the weight of his decision? He gave her the simplest truth. "Because you needed someone." Her lips curled into a small smile, the kind that shone despite fear. In that smile, Armand saw something powerful. Innocence untouched by conflict, hope untouched by division. He realized then that he had done the right thing, no matter what others might say. As he sat with her, he remembered stories he had heard about her mother, Lyra. People spoke of her as a commander who never forgave betrayal, who fought fiercely for her people. Armand wondered how she would react if she knew he had her daughter in his arms. Would she be furious? Would she see his act as kindness or as a trick? The thought unsettled him, but he pushed it away. He couldn't regret saving a child. Perhaps deep down, he hoped even someone like Lyra would understand that. The child rested quietly beside him now, no longer trembling, her hand still holding onto his. Armand looked at her and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. For a short while, the noise of conflict seemed far away. In that little moment, it was only him and the child. sitting in the calm after the storm. Armand didn't know it yet, but this act of protection would not remain hidden. Someone had seen him, and word would travel quickly. The story of the young man who saved the enemy's daughter would spread, and it would soon reach Lyra herself. For now, though, Armand simply sat there, his mind quiet. He had stepped into danger to save a life, and that choice had already begun weaving threads of fate. He could not see. The little girl leaned her head against his arm, safe and trusting, while Armand stared at the horizon, wondering how a single moment could hold so much weight. What he did not realize was that this moment had already bound him to a future he could not escape. The mother of this child, the very woman he had been raised to see as his enemy, would never forget what he had done. And soon, she would come looking for him. Lyra was a woman known for her strength. Her name carried weight among her people, and even her enemies spoke of her with both fear and respect. She was a leader who had fought many battles, someone who rarely allowed emotions to cloud her decisions. But everything changed the moment she heard the words that her daughter had been saved, not by her own people, but by a young man from the other side. When the messenger brought her the news, Lyra at first thought it was a mistake. How could it be that her child, her most precious treasure, had been shielded by a stranger she should have called an enemy? She pressed the messenger for details, and every word sank into her heart. The young man had risked himself to keep the child safe. He hadn't asked for anything in return. He could have turned away, but he had not. That night, when her daughter returned to her, dusty but unharmed, Lyra's heart nearly broke. She held the girl tightly, breathing in the warmth of her small body, her hands trembling even though she tried to remain strong. The little one spoke with excitement about the man who had saved her. She described him as kind, gentle, and brave. "He didn't let anything hurt me," she whispered before falling asleep in her mother's arms. Lyra sat there in silence for a long time, watching her daughter rest peacefully. Her mind was full of questions. Why would a man from the other side risk so much for her child? What did he hope to gain? But when she looked at the calm face of her little girl, she knew the answer might be simpler. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. For someone like Lyra, who had lived years surrounded by suspicion and strategy, this thought was both strange and powerful. She had built her life on never trusting outsiders, on keeping her guard up. And yet, this young man had done something that shattered those walls, if only for a moment. The next morning, Lyra made a decision. She wanted to see the man for herself. Not to punish him, not to question him harshly, but to understand. To look him in the eyes and see who he truly was. It didn't take long for her people to find him. They had already heard whispers about his brave act. Armand, the young villager, had returned quietly to his life, hoping no one would think much of what he had done. But he underestimated how quickly stories spread. By the time Lyra's guards approached him, the village already knew. Some looked at him with pride, others with suspicion, but all recognized that something unusual had taken place. When Armand stood before Lyra, he felt the weight of her presence immediately. She was not like anyone he had ever seen. Her gaze was sharp, her voice steady, her movements full of authority. Yet behind her strength, he sensed something else, an unspoken gratitude, a quiet storm of emotions she kept hidden. "You saved my daughter," Lyra said simply. Her voice carried no anger, no coldness, only truth. Armand nodded, unsure of what to say. "She needed help. I couldn't walk away." Those words stayed with Lyra. She studied him for a long moment, as if searching for weakness or hidden motives. But she found none. He looked back at her calmly, not trying to impress her, not trying to excuse himself. Just honest. For the first time in years, Lyra felt something shift inside her. She was a commander, used to leading with strength, but here was a man who had acted with pure humanity, without calculation. It unsettled her, yet it also drew her closer. "I owe you a debt," she said firmly. "You kept safe the one person I cannot lose. For that, I will not forget you." Armand tried to protest. You don't owe me anything. I did what anyone should do. But Lyra shook her head. No, she said with quiet conviction. Not everyone would have done it. Many would have left her. You chose differently, and that choice has meaning. Armand didn't know how to respond. He wanted to believe it was a simple act of kindness, nothing more. But looking into Lyra's eyes, he realized it was more than that. For her, his action had touched something deep. In the days that followed, Lyra made sure Armand's life became easier, even if he didn't ask for it. When his village lacked food, supplies mysteriously arrived. When dangers threatened, her guards kept watch from a distance. At first, Armand was confused. He hadn't asked for her protection, but he soon understood. This was her way of repaying a debt she could not ignore. The little girl, too, had not forgotten him. She spoke often of her rescuer, her small face lighting up whenever his name was mentioned. Sometimes she even tugged at her mother's sleeve, asking to see him again. Lyra, though hesitant at first, began to allow it. And each meeting between the child and Armand only deepened the bond. For Armand, these moments were both comforting and troubling. He loved seeing the child smile, hearing her laugh without fear. Yet he knew his own people might see him differently. Now, to them, he was walking a dangerous path, one that connected him with the enemy. Lyra, on the other hand, didn't care about what others thought. She had seen many men in her life, warriors, leaders, followers, but none had acted with such pure selflessness toward her daughter. In her heart, a strange feeling grew, one she could not easily name. Gratitude, yes, but also something stronger, something that tied her thoughts to him more than she wished to admit. She began to tell herself that fate had brought him to her, that perhaps there was a reason he had been there in that moment, shielding her child. The idea refused to leave her mind, and so slowly, her gratitude began to take root as something deeper, something she would not allow to slip away. Armand did not yet understand it, but by saving a child that day, he had become part of a story larger than himself, a story that was no longer about two sides fighting, but about an unspoken bond between a mother, her daughter, and the man who had stepped into their lives when they needed him most. Armand tried to return to his simple life, but nothing felt the same anymore. Days passed, but the memory of that small girl clinging to him remained clear in his mind. Sometimes he would wake at night, hearing her soft words, "Don't leave me," echoing in his thoughts. He told himself it was just a passing event, that life would return to normal. Yet deep down, he knew it wouldn't. His village people had begun whispering. Some admired what he had done, calling it a sign of bravery, but others looked at him with suspicion. To them, he had crossed a line by protecting the child of the enemy commander. Armand ignored their stares, but he couldn't ignore the way. It made him feel like he didn't fully belong anymore. One afternoon, as he worked outside repairing a broken fence, he noticed movement at the edge of the field. When he turned, he saw her again. The little girl, her face bright with excitement. She ran toward him, her small feet kicking up dust, and before he could react, she wrapped her arms around his leg, laughing with pure joy. Behind her stood Lyra, watching silently. Her presence carried the same weight as always, but there was something softer in her eyes this time. Armand froze, unsure of what to say. He bent down, greeting the child gently. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, glancing nervously at the village houses nearby. But the girl shook her head, smiling. "I wanted to see you." Her words were simple, but they carried warmth that melted the walls around Armand's heart. Lyra finally stepped closer. She wouldn't stop asking, she admitted. "I thought it was better to let her see you, rather than keep refusing." Armand nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. He noticed how Lyra's usual firmness seemed softened whenever her daughter was near. She was still a commander, still someone who carried authority in every movement. Yet here she stood, allowing her child to run freely into the arms of a man from the other side. Over time, these visits became more frequent. At first, Armand resisted. He worried about how his own people would see it. He worried about becoming too close. But the little girl's innocence broke through his hesitation. She would arrive with a smile, sometimes carrying flowers she had picked, sometimes simply bringing laughter that echoed through the quiet fields. And with her, always, was Lyra. She rarely spoke much during these visits, choosing instead to watch, silently observing how her daughter lit up in Armin's presence. Yet her silence was heavy. Armin could feel her eyes on him, weighing, measuring, almost as if she were trying to understand why fate had placed him in her life. One evening, after her daughter had fallen asleep in the grass from playing too long, Lyra finally spoke. "Do you know what it means, what you've done?" she asked quietly, her voice low but steady. Armin looked at her. "I only saved a child." "No," Lyra said, shaking her head. "You didn't just save a child. You saved my child. That changes everything." Armin had no answer. He could see in her eyes the depth of what she felt. To her, this wasn't a small act. It was something that had reached beyond walls, built by years of conflict. From that day on, things began to shift even more. Lyra sent food when his village had shortages. Medicines appeared when sickness spread. Armin never asked for these things, yet he knew they came because of her. His people were confused, some even angry. "Why would the enemy help us?" They demanded. "And why is it always linked to you?" Armin didn't know how to answer them. He only knew that the bond between him and Lyra's family was growing stronger, whether he wanted it to or not. There were moments when he felt torn apart, inside. On one side was his loyalty to his village, to his people who had raised him and trusted him. On the other side was the little girl who had become like a younger sister, and her mother, who looked at him with eyes that carried both gratitude and something deeper, something he couldn't name yet. But it made his heart restless. One night, as he sat outside under the stars, Armin thought about his choices. He had never wanted to be part of conflict. He wasn't a soldier, wasn't a leader. All he had wanted was a simple life. But now, life had pulled him into something far more complicated. He felt the weight of it pressing down on his chest. Yet he couldn't regret what he had done. If he had to go back, he would still shield the child. The next time Lyra visited, she surprised him. Instead of standing at a distance, she sat near him while her daughter played with flowers. For a long time they sat in silence, the quiet filled with unspoken thoughts. Finally, she said, "I don't know why you did what you did, but I can't. Let it go. You've become part of our lives now." Armin turned to her, startled. "I never meant to interfere." "It doesn't matter what you meant," Lyra said firmly. "What matters is that you did. And because of that, I can't ignore you anymore." Her words stayed with him long after she left that evening. He realized then that no matter how much he tried to step away, fate was pulling him closer to her world. The bond was no longer just between him and the child. It was now between him and Lyra as well. And though neither of them admitted it aloud, both could feel it growing stronger each day. For Armin, this realization was both comforting and frightening. He found peace in the child's laughter, strength in Lyra's gaze, yet fear in the thought of what his own people would say if they knew how deeply he was tied to them. For Lyra, the feeling was different. She had known many forms of loyalty, but this was new. It was not forced, not demanded. It was freely given, born out of a single act of courage. And she wasn't ready to let it go. Little by little, the lines between enemies blurred. And though Armin tried to resist, he knew in his heart that his life was no longer just his own. It was tied to the lives of a mother and her daughter, in ways he had never expected. Armin had always believed that kindness should be simple, something done freely without expectation. But now, he began to realize that sometimes an act of kindness could carry unexpected weight. What had started as gratitude from Lyra was slowly turning into something far more complex. At first, her gestures were small, sending food, ensuring his village was safe, allowing her daughter to see him often. Armin thought it was only her way of repaying a debt. But soon he noticed something changing in her behavior. She no longer looked at him as just the man who saved her child. Her eyes lingered on him longer. Her words carried meaning beyond politeness. One evening, when her daughter was playing nearby, Lyra spoke openly for the first time. "You are not like others," she said softly, almost as though she was speaking to herself. "Most people are bound by sides, by names and banners, but you saw only a child, not an enemy. That makes you different." Armin shifted uncomfortably. He didn't know how to respond. "Anyone would have done the same," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He knew deep inside that not everyone would have acted as he did. Lyra shook, her head gently. "No, not anyone. Only you." Her words left him unsettled. He tried to ignore the warmth that crept into his chest, but it lingered long after she had left that night. As the weeks passed, her presence in his life grew stronger. If danger approached his village, her guards were already there, standing watch without being asked. If someone tried to question his loyalty, she appeared, her authority silencing doubts. And when he tried to thank her, she dismissed his gratitude, with a single look as though it was unnecessary. At first, Armin felt grateful for her protection, but slowly he began to sense something else beneath it. It was no longer just about keeping him safe, it was about keeping him close. One day, as he prepared to leave the village to trade goods in a nearby town, Lyra stopped him. "You shouldn't." "Go alone," she said firmly. "I'll send 2 of my men with you." Armin shook his head. "That's not necessary. I've gone to the town many times without trouble." Lyra's expression hardened slightly. "It's necessary now. You are important, more important than you realize." Her words carried weight, and though he wanted to argue, he found himself unable to. He didn't want to hurt her feelings, especially not after all she had done. So he agreed, even though he felt uneasy about it. On the journey, the guards stayed, close, watching him carefully, almost as if he were a valuable treasure rather than a simple villager. When he returned, he found Lyra waiting, her daughter clinging to her side. She looked at him with relief, as though she had been holding her breath until she saw him safe again. That night, as he lay awake, Armin realized what troubled him. Gratitude had slowly turned into possession. Lyra was no longer just thankful. She was unwilling to let him go. And yet, he couldn't deny the bond that had formed. Her daughter adored him, running to him with open arms whenever she saw him. The child's laughter filled his heart with warmth he hadn't known he needed. And Lyra herself. She was strong, proud, and yet when she looked at him, he saw a softer side of her that she never showed to anyone else. One evening, when the child had fallen asleep between them, Lyra turned to him and said quietly, "I cannot imagine life without you now." Armin's breath caught. He wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He had never asked for this closeness, yet it was now woven into his days. He couldn't imagine the child's smile disappearing from his life either. And though he feared what it meant, he felt drawn to the way Lyra looked at him, not as an enemy, but as someone she trusted, perhaps even needed. But with that closeness came conflict. His own people began to distance themselves. Some whispered that he had been taken by the enemy, that he had forgotten where he came from. Others warned him to be careful, to not lose himself. He carried their doubts like a heavy stone in his chest. One afternoon, as he sat alone near the river, Lyra came to him. She sat quietly beside him for a while before speaking. "I know what they say about you," she said softly. "I know your people don't understand." Armin looked at her surprised. "And what about your people? Do they understand?" She gave a small smile, almost sad. "They do not question me. They know what I decide, they follow. But even if they did not, I would not change my mind about you." Her words sent a shiver through him. He realized then that she had already decided he was part of her life, whether he accepted it or not. The child stirred awake, running to hug him tightly. Her laughter filled the air, easing the tension for a moment. But deep in Armin's heart, he knew things could not remain so simple. Lyra's gratitude had become something stronger, something unyielding. She would not release him easily. That night, as he lay in his small home, Armin thought about the path ahead. He felt trapped between two worlds. His people, who now doubted, him and Lyra, who refused to let him go. And in the middle of it all was a child who saw him not as an enemy, not as a stranger, but as family. Armin knew a choice was coming, a choice he could not avoid. Armin knew the day of decision would come. He had felt it creeping closer for weeks, a quiet pressure that weighed on his chest. He loved the little girl like a sister, and he cared for Lyra in ways he had not yet admitted to himself. But he also felt the pull of his own people, his home, and the life he had always known. Every step forward with Lyra and her daughter felt right in the moment, yet he couldn't escape the thought of what he might lose by staying. The village had begun to notice. Some elders whispered that he had become too close to the enemy, that he was risking everything by spending so much time with Lyra and her child. Others, however, shook their heads, saying they understood his choice. They could see the bond he had with the girl and how carefully he treated her, how selflessly he acted. Still, no matter what anyone said, Armin could not ignore the tension he felt inside. One morning, as the sun rose in golden light over the hills, Lyra came to him again. Her daughter was skipping along beside her, clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked. She ran to Armin, throwing herself into his arms with a laugh that made his heart ache. He held her tightly, knowing how much she needed him, and in that small, simple act he realized he had already changed her world. Lyra watched quietly, her gaze fixed on him. There was pride in her eyes, yes, but also something deeper, almost possessive. She approached him and spoke softly, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken emotions. "I cannot imagine our lives without you," she said. "You have become part of our family, not because of duty, not because of fear, but because you chose to be here." Armin swallowed hard. He wanted to tell her that he didn't know if he could stay, that he worried about the future, about his village, about everything he was leaving behind. But when he looked at her, when he saw her eyes filled with trust and gratitude, he could not find the words. The truth was, a part of him already belonged here, and it frightened him to admit it. Days passed, and the tension in his heart grew. Each visit, each shared laugh with the child, each quiet conversation with Lyra reminded him how much he had become attached. And yet every time he thought of returning fully to his village, he felt the emptiness of leaving them behind. It was a choice between duty and love, between fear and courage, and he had never faced anything so difficult. One afternoon, as he walked along the river with the little girl skipping ahead, Lyra caught up to him. She stopped, facing him fully, her expression both tender and firm. "Armin," she said, "you have given my child her life in more ways than one. You have given her laughter, safety, and trust. I cannot and will not let you go easily." Her words hit him like a wave. He wanted to argue, to explain that he could not stay, that the life he had known was calling him. But when he looked at the child running toward the river, calling for him, he felt something shift. He realized that this bond, between him, the child, and Lyra, was stronger than any fear he had. That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky with orange and pink, Armin sat alone with Lyra. The child was asleep nearby, tired from a day full of play and laughter. Lyra spoke quietly, her hand brushing lightly against his. "I know you have your own world," she said. "I know it is not easy to decide. But you must know this. I will not ask you to stay out of fear or obligation. I ask you to stay, because you belong here." Armin's heart thudded. He realized that Lyra's insistence was not controlling, but rooted in appreciation, trust, and love. She saw what he had done, what he had given, and she wanted him not as a duty, but as a choice. And in that moment, Armin understood that staying with them was no longer a burden, it was a gift. The next morning, he visited his village one last time before making a final decision. He spoke with the elders, explaining that he had formed bonds he could not ignore, that he had a responsibility to someone who needed him deeply. There were murmurs of concern, some disappointment, but in the end, they understood. They could see that his heart had made its choice, and though it was not theirs, they respected it. When he returned to Lyra and her daughter, he felt a lightness in his chest. The little girl ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist, and for the first time he did not feel torn between two worlds. Lyra met him with a soft smile, her eyes shining. "You are home," she said simply. Armin knelt to meet the child's eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. She smiled brightly, a pure expression of joy and relief. Lyra reached for his hand, and together they watched the sunset over the hills. From that day on, Armin's life became intertwined with theirs. He no longer thought in terms of sides or enemies. He thought of family, of trust, of the moments that mattered, the laughter of a child, the quiet strength of a mother, the bond forged in courage and compassion. Though challenges came, as they always do, Armin faced them with a new sense of purpose. Lyra's guidance, the child's trust, and his own courage gave him strength he had never known. And in return, he gave them protection, love, and steadfast presence. A man who had once only sought to do the right thing, now choosing a life, shaped by that single act of bravery. The story of how he saved the child became a quiet legend in their region, not as a tale of conflict, but as a story of courage, compassion, and the unexpected ways human lives can intersect. Armin realized that sometimes the right choice is not the easiest one, but it is the one that binds hearts and changes lives. And so, he remained, by the side of Lyra and her daughter, no longer a man caught between two worlds, but a part of a family he had never expected to find, a family that would never let him go, and a bond that would last a lifetime.